In her arms, little Kobe Bentley, barely 6 months old, slept with his tiny fist curled against her collarbone, his breath warm against her neck. The basement laundry room had no heater, and the November cold seeped through the mansion's foundation like a living thing, hungry and merciless. Rachel had wrapped the baby in every clean towel she could find, creating a cocoon of cotton that kept him warm while she absorbed the cold into her own bones. She hadn't meant to fall asleep. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when there were 17 loads of laundry waiting. Not when Mrs. Chen would inspect the silver at dawn. Not when her shift had already stretched past midnight into the hollow hours of 3 a.m. But exhaustion was a tide that couldn't be fought forever, and her body had simply surrendered. The Butler mansion sprawled across 12 acres of manicured grounds in the city's most exclusive enclave, a monument to power built on foundations most people whispered about, but never questioned. Bentley Butler, the name alone, made hardened men look away, made business deals close with a handshake, made problems disappear into the night. At 32, he'd inherited his father's empire and expanded it into something that operated in shadows, but yielded very real wealth. Rachel had been working in the mansion for 8 months, 8 months of 18-hour days, of hands cracked raw from bleach and industrial detergent, of sleeping in a converted storage room that smelled perpetually of mothballs and regret. She was 24 and felt ancient, her dreams of finishing nursing school buried under the weight of her mother's medical bills and her younger brother's tuition. She'd taken the job because it paid double what other households offered, because the Butler estate needed someone who could work overnight shifts when the baby cried, because desperation made you accept terms you'd never consider in daylight. The other staff had warned her, "Don't look Mr. Butler in the eye. Don't ask questions. Don't expect kindness." The mansion ran on fear and efficiency in equal measure. The baby had been crying for 2 hours before Rachel had been called down from scrubbing the third-floor bathrooms. The nanny, a stern woman named Ms. Judith, who commanded respect through cold competence, had left for the evening, and the night nurse had called in sick. Someone needed to handle Kobe, and that someone became Rachel because she was there, because she was expendable, because she'd once mentioned she had younger siblings. She'd found him in the nursery, his face red and scrunched with the particular fury of an infant who couldn't understand why the world wasn't responding to his needs. His diaper was clean, his bottle prepared exactly as the instructions specified, but he wouldn't stop crying. Rachel had walked him, bounced him, sung to him in the off-key voice she usually reserved for when she was completely alone. Finally, she'd brought him down to the laundry room, the only space where she was allowed to be after midnight, the only place where his cries wouldn't echo through the marble hallways and disturb the master of the house. She'd continued folding the mountain of Egyptian cotton sheets with one hand, while holding Kobe against her shoulder with the other, and somewhere in the rhythm of work and warmth, he'd fallen asleep. But the laundry room was freezing. The heating system for the basement level had been scheduled for repair for 3 months, which was mansion code for not important enough to fix. Rachel had looked at the baby sleeping peacefully against her chest, had felt the ice creeping up from the floor through her thin canvas shoes, and had made a choice. She'd sat down on the concrete floor, her back against the industrial washing machine, and had wrapped herself around Kobe like a human shield. The towels cocooned him in warmth while her body blocked the cold. Her uniform, a gray dress that was more polyester than cotton, provided almost no insulation, but it didn't matter. The baby was warm. The baby was breathing steadily. The baby was safe. That was 3 hours ago. Now, in the depths of a November night that felt like the world had been carved from ice, Rachel slept with her cheek pressed against cold concrete, her arms locked around the most precious thing in a house full of priceless objects, her breath creating small clouds of mist in the air. She dreamed of warmth, of her mother's kitchen back in their small apartment, before the cancer diagnosis, before the medical bills that arrived like clockwork, before Rachel had learned that love sometimes meant sacrificing everything you thought you'd become. In her dream, she was making pancakes for her little brother, and the stove's warmth was the most luxurious thing she'd ever felt. The door to the laundry room opened at 4:47 a.m. Bentley Butler stood in the doorway, still wearing his Tom Ford suit from whatever business had kept him out until dawn, and stopped breathing. Before we continue with what happens next, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to take a turn that will change everything. Now, let's see what Bentley does when he finds his maid and his son on that freezing floor. Bentley's first instinct was anger. It rose in him like muscle memory, that familiar heat that had served him well in boardrooms and back alleys, the fury that made men twice his size step back. Someone had left his son, his heir, his only vulnerability in a world built on showing none, on a concrete floor in a room cold enough to see your breath. But the anger died before it could fully form, strangled by something he hadn't felt in so long, he almost didn't recognize it. Confusion. Because Rachel wasn't being negligent. She wasn't passed out drunk or distracted by her phone, or any of the 1,000 failures of duty he'd witnessed and punished in his organization. She was curled around Kobe like a parenthesis, like a question mark, like punctuation that gave meaning to a sentence he'd never learned to read. The baby was buried in what looked like every towel from the linen closet, wrapped so carefully that only his peaceful, sleeping face was visible. And Rachel, rail-thin Rachel with the shadows under her eyes and the hands that never stopped moving, had given him her own warmth while the cold claimed her instead. Bentley took 3 steps into the room. His Italian leather shoes made no sound on the concrete. He'd learned to move quietly years ago, when survival meant hearing threats before they arrived and arriving before you were heard. Up close, he could see Rachel was shivering even in sleep. Her lips had a faint blue tinge. Her fingers, still loosely wrapped around Kobe, were white at the knuckles. She'd pulled her thin uniform down over her legs in a futile attempt at insulation, and he could see goosebumps raised on every inch of exposed skin. Kobe was perfectly warm. Bentley touched his son's cheek with one finger, a gesture that felt foreign, invasive almost, in its tenderness, and felt healthy heat radiating from the bundle of towels. She'd chosen the cold, deliberately, consciously. She'd sat on a freezing floor and wrapped herself around his son and simply endured. Bentley Butler had built an empire on understanding leverage, on knowing what people wanted and what they feared, and how to use both to bend the world to his will. He could read a man's weakness in the way he held a handshake. He could smell desperation like cologne. He'd weaponized human nature so effectively that his name alone closed deals and ended arguments. But he didn't understand this. Rachel. His voice came out rougher than intended, scraping against the silence of the laundry room like gravel. She didn't stir. Her exhaustion was absolute. The kind of bone-deep weariness that shuts down everything but the most essential functions. In sleep, she looked younger, not the efficient, invisible servant who moved through his house like a ghost, but someone who might have had dreams once, before the world taught her that survival was the only dream that mattered. Bentley crouched down, his suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. This close, he could smell industrial detergent and baby powder and something underneath. The particular scent of someone who worked so hard they forgot to take care of themselves. "Rachel," he repeated, and this time he touched her shoulder. She jerked awake with a gasp, her arms instinctively tightening around Kobe before her eyes even opened. When they did, the fear in them was primal. The look of someone who'd learned that being caught vulnerable meant facing consequences. "Mr. Butler." She scrambled to sit up straighter, wincing as her frozen muscles protested. "I'm sorry, I didn't..." The baby was crying and Ms. Judith was gone, and I didn't mean to fall asleep. I was just keeping him warm and... Stop. The command was quiet but absolute. Rachel's mouth snapped shut. She looked down at Kobe, then back at Bentley, and he watched her try to calculate her punishment. He'd seen that expression before, that terrible mathematics people did when they depended on his mercy and knew how rarely he showed it. "How long have you been down here?" "I don't..." She glanced at the clock on the wall and her eyes widened. 4 hours? Maybe. The baby wouldn't stop crying, and I thought if I brought him down here it wouldn't disturb you, and he fell asleep, but it was so cold and I couldn't put him back in the crib because he'd wake up and cry again, and I just... She was rambling, her words tumbling over each other like she could build a wall of explanation between herself and whatever punishment was coming. Her teeth were chattering now that she was awake, her body shaking in waves she tried unsuccessfully to suppress. Bentley stood abruptly. Rachel flinched. He shrugged out of his suit jacket. Bryony, custom-tailored, worth more than most people's monthly salary, and held it out to her. Rachel stared at it like he'd offered her a live grenade. "Take it," Bentley said. I'm fine, Mr. Butler. I don't need..." "You're hypothermic." He'd seen enough bodies in his line of work to recognize the signs. "Take the jacket. That's not a request." Slowly, as if expecting the jacket to bite her, Rachel reached out with one hand while keeping Kobe secure with the other. Bentley watched her fumble with it for a moment before his patience, already stretched thin by a night of negotiations that had tested even his considerable tolerance for violence, snapped. "Here!" He moved behind her, draping the jacket over her shoulders, and felt her entire body go rigid at his proximity. The jacket swallowed her. She was smaller than he'd realized, all sharp angles and exhaustion under the shapeless uniform. When had he last actually looked at his staff? When had they become anything more than functions, tasks completed or left undone? "I'll take Kobe back to the nursery," Bentley said, reaching for his son. "No!" The word burst from Rachel with surprising force. Then softer, terrified. "I mean, he'll wake up, he'll cry. He only just fell asleep. And if he cries, you won't..." "You need your rest, sir. You have that meeting in the morning with..." "How do you know about my meeting?" Rachel's face went pale. Mrs. Chen mentioned it when she was reviewing the schedule. I didn't mean to... I wasn't listening. Rachel. Bentley held up one hand and she fell silent again. "Give me my son." For a long moment she didn't move. Her arms stayed locked around Kobe, and Bentley saw something flicker in her eyes. Defiance, maybe, or desperation. The look of someone who'd been pushed past the point where consequences mattered because she'd already lost everything that could be taken. Then slowly, she loosened her grip. Bentley lifted Kobe carefully, supporting his head the way the nanny had shown him exactly twice before he delegated all childcare to staff who were paid to care so he didn't have to learn. The baby stirred, made a small noise of protest, but didn't wake. His son was warm and perfect, and absolutely vulnerable in his arms, and the weight of that vulnerability felt like evidence of a crime Bentley hadn't realized he was committing. "Get up," Bentley said to Rachel. "You're going to the guest room on the second floor." "Mr. Butler, I can't. I have 17 loads of laundry, and Mrs. Chen needs the silver polished before—" "The laundry will wait." "The silver will wait." He looked down at her, still sitting on the freezing floor in his jacket, shivering hard enough that the fabric rippled. "How many hours have you worked today?" Rachel's eyes dropped. I'm not sure." "Estimate." 18, maybe 20. "And you ate?" Silence. "Rachel." "I had breakfast yesterday morning," she whispered. "There wasn't time for lunch, and dinner is for after the kitchen is cleaned, but Mr. Zhang needed help with the wine cellar inventory, and then Kobe was crying, and—" Bentley felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the laundry room. "You worked 20 hours on one meal?" "I'm fine." "You passed out on a concrete floor." "I didn't pass out, I closed my eyes for a minute. 4 hours ago." Rachel had no answer for that. She looked down at her hands, still white-knuckled from the cold, and Bentley saw her shoulders curve inward, like she could make herself small enough to disappear. He'd built his empire on being merciless, on understanding that mercy was a weakness competitors exploited and enemies used to find your throat. His father had taught him that lesson with fists and cigarette burns and a coldness that made winter feel warm by comparison. "You're a butler," his father had said. "We don't feel. We take." But standing in a freezing laundry room at dawn, holding his sleeping son while a woman who'd sacrificed her own warmth to keep that son safe shivered in his jacket, Bentley Butler felt something crack in the foundation he'd built his life on. "Come on," he said, and his voice came out gentler than he'd intended. "Let's get you both somewhere warm." Rachel looked up at him with eyes that held no trust, but a desperate kind of hope, and Bentley realized with uncomfortable clarity that somewhere in the running of his household, in the efficient machinery of his life, he'd forgotten that the people who served him were actually people. Tomorrow, that would matter. Tomorrow, he'd have to face what that meant and what he was going to do about it. But tonight, this morning, really, in the dead hours between dark and dawn, he just helped Rachel to her feet, steadied her when her frozen legs nearly buckled, and led her and his son out of the cold. The guest room on the second floor was a universe away from Rachel's converted storage closet. Bentley watched her freeze in the doorway, Kobe still cradled against her chest, and saw her take in the space with the wide-eyed incomprehension of someone who'd forgotten that rooms like this existed. The four-poster bed with its cream silk duvet, the fireplace with actual logs arranged in perfect geometry, the ensuite bathroom, visible through an open door, all marble and brass fixtures that gleamed even in the pre-dawn darkness. "I can't," Rachel started. "You can," Bentley interrupted. He moved past her to the fireplace, where kindling and wood waited for exactly this purpose, though he couldn't remember the last time anyone had actually used this room. His hands remembered the motion of building a fire from childhood, before the mansion, before the empire, when his mother was still alive and home meant something other than marble and menace. The fire caught on the third match. Flames licked up the kindling with hungry enthusiasm, and warmth began to radiate into the room like a promise being kept. "Sit," Bentley said, nodding toward the armchair positioned near the fireplace. Rachel didn't move. She stood just inside the doorway, still wearing his jacket over her wrinkled uniform, holding Kobe like he was the only anchor keeping her from floating away into impossibility. Her eyes darted from the fire to the bed to Bentley and back again, trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. "Rachel, sit down before you fall down." This time she obeyed, but her movements were stiff, perched on the edge of the armchair like she was ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Bentley understood. In her position, he wouldn't trust this either. Kindness from people in power was usually just cruelty wearing a different mask. Kobe stirred against her shoulder, making the small grunting noises that preceded either settling back to sleep or full-volume screaming. Rachel adjusted him automatically, swaying slightly even while sitting, and the baby quieted. "You're good with him," Bentley heard himself say. Rachel's eyes snapped to his, startled. I have younger siblings. Had. I still have them, they're not babies anymore." "How many?" "Two, a brother and a sister." Her voice softened when she talked about them, some of the fear bleeding away. "Marcus is 17, and Lily just turned 14. They're good kids. You take care of them." It wasn't a question, but Rachel answered anyway. "I send money home. For rent, for Marcus's school supplies, for—" She stopped abruptly, like she'd said too much. "For your mother's medical bills," Bentley finished. The color drained from Rachel's face. "How did you—" "I know everything about the people who work in my house." It was true. Background checks were standard, thorough, invasive. He'd read her file the day she was hired, and hadn't thought about it since. Single mother, stage 4 cancer, 2 younger siblings, father deceased, nursing school dropout, worked 3 jobs before this one. The file had been a collection of facts. He was only now realizing they were also a story. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months when you took this job. She's still alive. 8 months now. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "The treatment is working. Slowly, but it's working. The treatment you're paying for. Someone has to." Bentley crossed to the window, looking out over grounds that were still dark, but beginning to show the first gray hints of dawn. Behind him, he heard Rachel's breathing, shaky and uneven, and the small sounds of Kobe sleeping. He'd ordered men beaten for smaller infractions than falling asleep on the job. He'd fired staff for taking breaks, for making mistakes, for showing any sign of the human weakness that made them unreliable. Efficiency was everything. Results were everything. The machinery of his life ran on people who understood that their needs were secondary to his requirements. And Rachel, exhausted, starving, freezing Rachel, had wrapped herself around his son and chosen the cold, because keeping Kobe warm was more important than keeping herself safe. "Why didn't you ask for help?" The question came out harder than he'd intended. Ms. Judith, the night nurse, any of the other staff— Ms. Judith was off duty, the night nurse called in sick, and the others— Rachel stopped, choosing her words carefully. "The others have their own responsibilities, Mr. Butler. I didn't want to bother anyone." "So you handled it alone." "That's what I'm paid to do." "You're paid to do laundry and clean bathrooms, not to be a nurse." "I'm paid to do whatever needs doing," Rachel corrected quietly. "That's what Mrs. Chen said when she hired me. Whatever needs doing, whenever it needs doing, no questions asked." So when Kobe needed someone, I was someone. The simplicity of it stunned him. The absolute absence of resentment or calculation. She'd cared for his son not because she wanted recognition or reward, but because a baby was crying and she was there, and therefore it became her responsibility. When had Bentley last done something simply because it needed doing? "How much are we paying you?" he asked. Rachel's fingers tightened on Kobe. That's between Mrs. Chen and—" "How much?" "40,000 a year." The number hit Bentley like a physical blow. 40,000. He'd spent more than that on a watch last month, on a bottle of wine at a business dinner. on a suit he'd worn exactly once. Rachel worked 18-hour days, slept in a storage closet, went hungry, and froze on concrete floors for $40,000 a year. "That's changing," he said. "Mr. Butler, 60,000 effective immediately. Plus, overtime for any hours over 40 per week, which I'm guessing is every single week." Rachel made a sound like she'd been punched. "I can't, you can't just, I can, I am." He turned back to face her. "You'll also get proper breaks, meal breaks. Your schedule will be adjusted so you actually sleep more than 4 hours a night. But the work, we'll hire additional staff to cover the work." Rachel was shaking her head, not in refusal, but in sheer disbelief. "Why? Why would you? I fell asleep, I messed up, I should be. You saved my son from hypothermia by giving him your warmth." Bentley's voice cut through her spiraling panic. "You worked 20 hours on one meal. You didn't complain, didn't ask for help, didn't fail. The only person who messed up here is me." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their honesty. Bentley Butler didn't apologize, didn't admit fault, didn't acknowledge weakness. But he also didn't lie to himself, and the truth was, suddenly, uncomfortably clear. He'd built a house that ran on exploitation. He'd created a system where people like Rachel could be worked until they collapsed. And as long as the laundry got done and the silver was polished, he'd never bothered to notice the cost. "I don't understand," Rachel whispered. "Neither do I," Bentley admitted. "But we're going to figure it out." Kobe chose that moment to wake up, his face scrunching with displeasure before the first wail escaped. Rachel immediately stood, swaying slightly, beginning the practiced bounce and sway that seemed hardwired into anyone who'd ever cared for an infant. "He's probably hungry," she said over the crying. "His bottle should be in the nursery. I'll get it." Bentley moved toward the door, then stopped. "Stay here. Keep warm. I'll be back in 5 minutes." "Mr. Butler, I can—" "Rachel." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the uniform and the fear to the woman underneath, young, exhausted, desperately trying to hold her life together with willpower and sacrifice. "For once in what I'm guessing is a very long time, let someone take care of you." Her eyes filled with tears, she blinked back furiously. "I don't know how to do that." "Me neither," Bentley said. "But we're both going to learn." He left before she could argue, Kobe's cries echoing down the hallway behind him. The mansion was beginning to wake. He could hear the kitchen staff moving around below, starting preparations for breakfast, beginning another day in the machine that kept his life running smoothly. But, as Bentley walked toward the nursery to get a bottle for his son, past paintings worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, through hallways polished to mirror brightness by people he'd never thanked, he felt the foundations of his carefully constructed world beginning to shift. Finding Rachel on that freezing floor had cracked something open. Now he had to decide what to do with what was spilling out, all the uncomfortable truths he'd spent years not looking at, all the humanity he'd trained himself not to feel. By the time he returned to the guest room with the bottle, Bentley Butler had made a decision that would change everything. He just didn't know yet if it would save him or destroy him. But looking at Rachel wrapped in his jacket, holding his son by firelight, he realized he was willing to find out. The bottle was warm in Bentley's hands when he returned. Rachel had moved closer to the fire, still swaying with Kobe, and the orange light painted shadows across her exhausted face that made her look like a Renaissance painting. Something about sacrifice and maternal devotion that belonged in museums, not laundry rooms. "Here." He handed her the bottle. Rachel shifted Kobe, offering him the nipple. The baby latched on immediately, his cries cutting off, as he drank with the single-minded intensity of the very young. The room fell into a silence, broken only by the crackling fire and Kobe's satisfied feeding sounds. Bentley should have left, should have returned to his own wing of the mansion, to the empire that needed managing, to the version of himself that made sense. Instead, he found himself sitting in the chair opposite Rachel, watching his son eat, watching this woman who'd given everything to keep that son safe. "My father built this house," Bentley said suddenly. The words came without permission, surprising him. Every marble floor, every chandelier, every inch of it was designed to show power, to make people feel small. Rachel looked up, uncertain. He used to say that mercy was for the weak, that if you let people see you care, they'd use it against you. Bentley stared into the fire. He wasn't wrong. In my world, every vulnerability is a weapon your enemies can turn on you. "That sounds lonely," Rachel said softly. "It is." The admission cost him something. "But it kept me alive, kept the business running, kept..." He gestured vaguely at the opulent room. "All of this intact. Is that why you never hold Kobe?" The question was barely audible. "Because you're afraid to care?" Bentley's jaw tightened. "I hold him." "You hired people to hold him," Rachel corrected gently. "There's a difference." The truth of it struck like a blade. Bentley had hired nannies and nurses, and staff, specifically so he wouldn't have to be vulnerable, so he wouldn't have to feel the terrifying softness that came with loving something completely. He'd thought he was protecting Kobe. Now he realized he'd been protecting himself. "My wife died giving birth to him," Bentley said. The words came out rough, unpracticed. He never talked about Elena. It wasn't a love marriage. It was strategic, families merging territories. But she was good, kind, and she died bringing him into the world, and His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, angry at the weakness. "You blamed him," Rachel finished. "No." "Yes, I don't know." Bentley ran a hand through his hair. "I look at him and I see everything I could lose, everything that could be taken from me. My father taught me that love makes you weak, and losing Elena proved him right." "Or," Rachel said, "it proved that love makes you human." Kobe had finished eating. Rachel lifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently. Bentley watched his son, really watched him, and saw Elena's nose, his own dark eyes, and something entirely new. A person who hadn't asked to be born into this world of marble and menace, who deserved more than a father too afraid to hold him. "I don't know how to be what he needs," Bentley admitted. "Then learn," Rachel said simply. "He doesn't need perfect. He just needs you." Bentley stood abruptly, crossing to where Rachel sat. "Give him to me." Rachel's eyes widened. "Mr. Butler, please." She hesitated, then carefully transferred Kobe into Bentley's arms. The baby was warm and solid and impossibly fragile, and Bentley felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble completely. Kobe looked up at him with dark, curious eyes. His son, his heir, his second chance at being human. "I'm giving you a new position," Bentley said, still looking at Kobe. "Full-time nanny, triple your current salary. Your own suite, benefits, vacation time. You'll be responsible for Kobe and nothing else," Rachel gasped. "I can't." "You can. You will." Now Bentley looked at her. "Because you already love him. Because you chose the cold to keep him warm. Because he deserves someone who sees him as a child, not a duty." "What about Ms. Judith?" "I'll handle Ms. Judith." Tears spilled down Rachel's cheeks. "Why are you doing this?" Because you reminded me that there's a difference between surviving and living, Bentley said, and I'm tired of just surviving. He looked down at his son, then back at the woman who'd saved him. We both are. 3 months later, Rachel stood in the nursery, her nursery now, watching the morning sun paint gold across walls she'd helped choose. Soft yellow instead of sterile white. A rocking chair by the window where she could sing to Kobe without worrying about disturbing anyone. Photographs on the walls, her siblings visiting for Christmas, Kobe's first smile, moments that mattered more than marble. The door opened quietly. Bentley entered, no longer the cold specter who terrified her, but something more complicated. A man learning to be human again, one awkward step at a time. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Morning." Rachel smiled, adjusting Kobe in her arms. Someone's been asking for his daddy. Bentley's expression softened in ways she'd never imagined possible 3 months ago. He crossed the room and took his son with the practiced ease of repetition, of showing up every morning and every evening, of choosing presence over protection. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, and Kobe grabbed his father's finger with that iron infant grip that seemed to say, "I've got you." Rachel had learned that Bentley's empire hadn't crumbled when he started caring. If anything, it had strengthened. His people respected him more now that they feared him less, now that he saw them as people rather than functions. The mansion still ran efficiently, but it ran on fair wages and reasonable hours, and the radical notion that staff deserved dignity. Her mother's cancer was in remission. Marcus had been accepted to engineering school. Lily was talking about becoming a doctor. And Rachel had discovered that sometimes the cold floor was just the beginning of the story, not the end. "I've been thinking," Bentley said, still focused on Kobe, "about extending the staff wellness program, maybe hiring a nutritionist, making sure everyone actually eats properly." Rachel bit back a smile. "That sounds good. And I want to set up a scholarship fund for staff and their families, education, medical expenses, whatever they need." Now he looked at her. "I'm thinking of calling it the Rachel Campbell Butler Foundation." Rachel's breath caught. He'd included her name. "Made her part of his family's legacy. She would have liked you," Bentley continued quietly. "Elena, she always said I needed someone to remind me I was human. I think you're doing pretty well with that yourself these days." "I had a good teacher." He shifted Kobe, and Rachel saw the love naked on his face, terrifying and transformative and utterly real. "Both of you did." They stood together in the golden morning light, watching Kobe yawn and stretch, perfect and oblivious to how a freezing laundry room floor had changed everything. Rachel thought about that night sometimes, how close she'd come to hypothermia, how easily it could have ended differently. But she'd chosen warmth for Kobe. And somehow, impossibly, that choice had brought warmth back to all of them. "Rachel?" Bentley's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Yeah? Thank you. For that night, for every night since, for..." He paused, searching for words. "For not giving up on us." Rachel reached out, touching Kobe's tiny hand, then meeting Bentley's eyes. "Family doesn't give up," she said simply. "That's what you taught me." Outside, the mansion was waking. Staff moving through hallways with dignity instead of fear, the machinery of life running on compassion instead of cruelty. It wasn't perfect. Some days were still hard. But it was real. And on a freezing floor 3 months ago, that's exactly what they'd all needed. Something real to hold on to in the cold. Kobe made a happy gurgling sound, and both adults laughed. The sound echoed through the nursery, through the mansion, through all the empty spaces that were slowly learning to be full. So, what do you think? Could you sacrifice your own comfort to save someone else? Have you ever had a moment that changed everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like and share it with someone who needs to remember that one act of kindness can transform everything. Sometimes the coldest nights lead to the warmest futures.